$2.8 billion. That was Apple's market cap in 1997. And I want you to sit with that number for a second, because 10 years later, in 2007, that number was $150 billion. From $2.8 billion to $150 billion, a 50x increase in 10 years. And this was not some hot startup nobody had heard of. This was Apple, a company that everyone, and I mean everyone, had written off as dead. Michael Dell, the founder of Dell Computers, was asked at a conference in October 1997 what he would do if he ran Apple. His answer? I'd shut it down and give the money back to the shareholders. That is what the world thought of Apple. Shut it down, give the money back. Game over. And honestly, when you look at the numbers from 1997, it is hard to argue with Dell. Apple had lost $1.6 billion during Gil Amelio's 500-day reign as CEO. Their market share had collapsed to 3.6% globally. They had less than 90 days of cash left. 90 days. And they had, this is the part that blows my mind, over 350 different products. 350 products, many of them overlapping with each other, competing with each other, cannibalizing each other. It was chaos, pure organizational chaos. And then one person came back and in 10 years turned that chaos into the most valuable consumer electronics company on earth. This is the story of the decade that changed tech. And the playbook, honestly, it is the most useful business framework I have ever come across. Let me walk you through the whole thing. Now, I have talked about Steve Jobs' personal story before. The firing, the exile, Next Tech, Pixar, the comeback. But what I have not talked about in depth is what he actually did when he got back. Because the personal story is dramatic, sure, but the business story is where the real lessons are. The specific product decisions, the specific strategic choices, the thing he did with a whiteboard and a marker that saved the entire company. That is what I want to focus on today. And actually, before we get into what Jobs did, I want to give you a sense of just how bad things were at Apple in 1997, because I do not think people fully appreciate the depth of the crisis. Apple's worst single quarter was the period ending March 28, 1997. They lost $708 million. In one quarter, revenue had dropped from $11.1 billion in fiscal 1995 to $7.1 billion in fiscal 1997. And the Mac clone licensing program that Gil Amelio had expanded was actually accelerating the decline because companies like Power Computing were making cheaper, faster Mac-compatible machines and stealing Apple's own customers. It was like Apple was paying other companies to put them out of business. The engineering teams were demoralized, talented people were leaving, and the company had no clear direction. They had been working on a next-generation operating system called Copeland for years and had just abandoned it because it was nowhere near ready for release. That is what led them to acquire Next in the first place. Apple was so broken that they literally had to buy a new operating system from the outside. And of course, the Next acquisition came with a bonus: Steve Jobs. So it is July 1997. Jobs has been back at Apple as an advisor since the Next acquisition closed in February. He has spent 5 months watching, learning, understanding how broken things are. And on the weekend of July 5th and 6th, he engineers the ouster of Gil Amelio. The board removes Amelio, and Jobs becomes interim CEO. They shorten it to iCEO, which people love to point out is technically the first i product from Apple, predating even the iMac. And the first thing Jobs does is something that I think about all the time, because it goes against every instinct most CEOs have. Most new CEOs walk in and say, what can we add? What new markets can we enter? What new products can we launch? Jobs walks in and says, what can we subtract? And this is where I want to introduce what I am calling the Subtraction Formula. Because after spending a truly unreasonable amount of time studying this 10-year period, I have identified 5 steps that Apple followed. And the thing that makes this framework different from most business frameworks is that it is not about growth. It is about focus. Way less. Radically less. And it turns out that doing radically less, when done correctly, is the most powerful growth strategy in business. Step 1 of the Subtraction Formula: kill everything that does not fit in the grid. This is the single most famous strategic move in Apple's history. And honestly, I think it might be the most important strategic move in business history, period. Here's what happened. Jobs spends weeks in product review meetings. Every team comes in and pitches their product. And Jobs is sitting there, listening, getting more and more frustrated. Because none of it makes sense. Apple is making computers for consumers, computers for businesses, computers for education, Newton PDAs, printers, peripherals, and they are licensing their operating system to clone manufacturers. It is a mess, And after weeks of this, Jobs has had enough. He shouts, "Stop, this is crazy." He grabs a marker, walks barefoot to a whiteboard, and draws a simple 2x2 grid. 2 columns, desktop and portable. 2 rows, consumer and professional. 4 quadrants. That is it. Here's what we need, he says. If a product does not fit in one of these 4 boxes, it gets cut. And then he starts cutting. Newton PDA? Gone. OpenDoc? Gone. His actual words about OpenDoc: "I was for putting a bullet in the head of OpenDoc." CyberDog? Gone. Pippin Gaming Console? Gone. The entire Performa line? Gone. Multiple printers and peripherals? Gone. He kills over 70% of Apple's product line. The company goes from 350 products to roughly 10, and he lays off 4,100 employees, a quarter of the workforce, and then he kills the clone program. This is brilliant. Apple had been licensing macOS to third-party manufacturers since 1994, and the clones were destroying Apple's hardware business. Apple received only about $50 per clone Mac sold, which did not even come close to covering the lost revenue from cannibalized Apple hardware sales. Jobs exploits a loophole in the licensing agreement. The original contracts covered System 7, but the new macOS 8, released in July 1997, was not covered by those contracts. On September 2nd, he buys Power Computing, the most aggressive clone maker, for $100 million in Apple stock. The clone program is dead. Now, everyone criticizes these moves at the time. Analysts, journalists, industry watchers, they all say Jobs is crazy. He is shrinking the company when he should be expanding. He is cutting products when he should be adding them. And here is what Jobs says about this. And honestly, this is my single favorite Steve Jobs quote of all time. People think focus means saying yes to the thing you've got to focus on. But that's not what it means at all. It means saying no to the 100 other good ideas that there are. You have to pick carefully. I'm actually as proud of the things we haven't done as the things I have done. Innovation is saying no to 1,000 things. I want to pause here because this principle, the principle of subtraction, is something that 99% of founders get wrong. When things are going badly, the instinct is to do more. Launch more products, enter more markets, hire more people, diversify, hedge your bets. And Jobs does the exact opposite. He subtracts, he deletes, he simplifies, and it saves the company. Because when you have 4 products instead of 350, every engineer, every designer, every marketer is focused on making those 4 products incredible. The quality goes up, the costs go down, the message to consumers becomes crystal clear, and the company can actually execute. But before Jobs can launch those 4 products, he needs money, and he needs credibility. Which brings us to 2 moves that happen almost simultaneously. First, the Microsoft deal. On August 6, 1997, at Macworld Boston, Jobs announces that Microsoft will invest $150 million in non-voting Apple stock. Microsoft will commit to developing Office for Mac for at least 5 years. And Internet Explorer will become the default browser on Mac. When Bill Gates appears via satellite on a giant screen behind Jobs, the audience boos. Actually boos. And Jobs later told his biographer Walter Isaacson, "That was my worst and stupidest staging event ever. It made me look small, and Apple look small." But the deal was genius for multiple reasons. The $150 million in cash helped Apple's balance sheet. The commitment to Office for Mac meant Apple computers would remain compatible with the dominant productivity software in the world. And the settlement of all patent litigation removed a huge legal overhang. But here's the part most people miss. Microsoft had its own reason for doing the deal. They controlled about 95% of desktop operating systems. If Apple died, the Department of Justice would almost certainly break Microsoft up as a monopoly. Keeping Apple alive was an insurance policy against antitrust action. Gates was not saving Apple out of kindness. He was protecting Microsoft. Second, the Think Different campaign, launched on September 28, 1997, created by TBWA Chiat Day. The slogan was created by art director Craig Tanimoto, and the TV commercial featured black and white footage of Albert Einstein, Martin Luther King Jr., John Lennon, Muhammad Ali, Mahatma Gandhi, Amelia Earhart, Pablo Picasso, and those words, "Here's to the crazy ones, the misfits, the rebels, the troublemakers, the round pegs in the square holes, the ones who see things differently." The campaign won the 1998 Emmy Award for Best Commercial and the 2000 Grand Effie Award for the most effective advertising campaign in America. But more than awards, it did something essential. It reminded the world what Apple stood for. Not just computers, creativity, innovation, thinking differently. And it re-established Apple's counterculture brand identity at exactly the moment when the company needed it most. And I want to tell you what Jobs said internally when he introduced the campaign to Apple employees. Because this speech reveals so much about how he thinks about marketing. He said, "To me, marketing is about values. This is a very complicated world, it's a very noisy world, and we're not going to get a chance to get people to remember much about us." And then he cited Nike as the gold standard. The best example of all, and one of the greatest jobs of marketing the universe has ever seen, is Nike. Nike sells a commodity, they sell shoes, and yet when you think of Nike, you feel something different than a shoe company. That is what Jobs wanted Apple to be. Not a company that sells computers, a company that makes you feel something. And Think Different achieved exactly that. It made people feel like buying an Apple product was an act of rebellion, an act of creativity, an act of thinking differently about the world. That emotional connection is what separates a brand from a commodity, and Jobs understood that better than anyone in business. Now, speaking of thinking differently about your business, if you are a founder trying to create ad content that actually converts, I want to tell you about AI Adsy. It is an AI tool that generates viral UGC and product ad videos. You can give it a reference video for inspiration, and it creates content designed to get 3x better conversions than traditional ads. If you are tired of wasting money on creative that nobody watches, check out AIAdsy.com. I know multiple founders who have completely transformed their ad performance with this tool. Okay, back to Apple. Step 2 of the subtraction formula, make one product undeniable. Because all the focus in the world does not matter if the product is not great. And the first product out of Jobs' new 4-quadrant strategy is the iMac, introduced on May 6, 1998. And it is unlike anything the computer industry has ever seen. The design is by Jonathan Ive, a young British designer who had been at Apple since 1992, but had been marginalized under previous leadership. The iMac is translucent Bondi blue. It is shaped like a teardrop. It looks like a piece of art, not a computer. And the inspiration for the color? A piece of greenish-blue beach glass that one of the designers brought to a meeting. That little piece of sea glass became one of the most iconic product designs in history. And Jobs makes 2 controversial decisions with the iMac. First, he eliminates the floppy disk drive. In 1998, this is considered insane. Everyone uses floppy disks. Analysts say Apple is committing suicide by removing a feature that every computer user relies on. And Jobs says, the future is USB and the internet. He is right, of course. But at the time, people think he has lost his mind. Second, the iMac embraces USB as the primary connectivity standard, helping establish USB as the industry standard. And actually, one more thing about the iMac design that I think is worth mentioning. Before the iMac, computers were beige boxes. All of them. Every PC, every Mac. Beige. Boring. Ugly. They sat on your desk like office furniture that happened to compute things. Nobody loved the way their computer looked. And Jony Ive's design changed that. The Bondi Blue iMac was something people wanted to put on their desks. It was something they showed off to friends. It made computing feel fun. And that shift, from computers as tools to computers as objects of desire, that is arguably Jony Ive's greatest contribution. He did not just design a computer. He made people feel differently about computers. The iMac goes on sale on August 15, 1998, priced at $1,290, and it sells. 5 million iMacs sold by April 2001. That is about 5,112 iMacs every single day, one every 1.18 seconds, and the financial impact is immediate. Apple lost $878 million in 1997. In 1998, they earned $414 million, first annual profit in 3 years. The iMac alone does not save Apple, but it proves that Apple can still make products people love. It proves that design matters, and it gives the world a reason to believe in Apple again. Step 3 of the subtraction formula: build the ecosystem, not just the product. And this is where Apple goes from a turnaround story to a growth machine. Because the next thing Jobs does changes not just Apple but the entire music industry, and then the entire phone industry, and then, arguably, the entire technology industry. It starts in October 2001 with the iPod. Now, I need to give you context on the state of portable music in 2001 because it explains why the iPod was so transformative. There were MP3 players on the market. Creative had the Nomad. There were a bunch of small, cheap, flash-based players that could hold maybe 30 songs, and the experience of using them was terrible. Clunky interfaces, bad software, ugly design. Transferring songs involved confusing desktop applications that crashed constantly. The products existed, but the experience was awful. And this is key. Sometimes the opportunity is not to create a new category, it is to fix a broken one. The MP3 player category existed. It was just terrible. And Apple made it not terrible. In fact, they made it delightful. 1,000 songs in your pocket. A 5GB hard drive in a device that fits in your hand. Priced at $399. Tony Fadell, who Jobs hires in April 2001 to lead iPod development, is given a team of 30 engineers and a deadline that would make most hardware teams weep. The entire development cycle from Fadell's hiring to Jobs' onstage reveal is approximately 8 months. 8 months to design, engineer, manufacture, and launch an entirely new product category. That is insane. And the reason it is possible is because of the focus that Jobs established with the product grid. When you are not spread across 350 products, you can throw your best people at one project and move like a startup. And here is a detail that I absolutely love. Apple's hardware VP, John Rubinstein, visits Toshiba in Japan and discovers they have developed a tiny 1.8-inch hard drive the size of a silver dollar that can hold 5 gigabytes. Toshiba does not know what to do with it. They have no product vision for this technology. Rubinstein immediately sees its potential and secures exclusive rights for Apple. One meeting in a Toshiba office in Japan, and that tiny hard drive becomes the technological foundation of the most successful consumer electronics product of the decade. Now, the iPod is not the first MP3 player. There are others on the market. Creative Zen.iRiver, Samsung Yep, SanDisk Sansa. But they all have terrible user interfaces, terrible software, and terrible design. The iPod has the scroll wheel, which is inspired by Bang & Olufsen's Beocom 6000 telephone. The physical design is inspired by Dieter Rams' 1958 Braun T3 transistor radio. And it is paired with iTunes, which Apple had launched in January 2001 as a music management application. The combination of beautiful hardware and seamless software is what makes the iPod different from everything else. And here is what I think most people miss about the iPod's success. The initial reception was actually lukewarm. When Jobs unveiled it on October 23, 2001, the tech press was skeptical. Comments on internet forums said things like, "Great, just what the world needs, another MP3 player, and no wireless, less space than a Nomad. Lame." That last quote has become one of the most famously wrong product reviews in the history of technology. The iPod was Mac only at launch. It sold 125,000 units in the first quarter. Not bad, but not world-changing. The explosion did not happen until Windows compatibility came in mid-2002, and especially when iTunes for Windows launched in October 2003. The lesson? Sometimes a great product needs time and the right distribution to reach its audience. The iPod did not become the iPod overnight. It took 2 years of iteration and platform expansion. But the real genius move comes on April 28, 2003. The iTunes Music Store. 200,000 songs available for download at 99 cents each, $9.99 per album. No subscription. You own what you buy. And getting this off the ground required Jobs to do something incredibly difficult. He had to convince the 5 major record labels to license their music for digital download. And the labels were terrified. Napster and file-sharing piracy were destroying their business. They were losing billions in revenue to people downloading music for free. And here comes this computer company CEO saying, "Trust me, people will pay for digital music if you make it easy enough." And Jobs has this brilliant argument. He tells the labels, "Look, the iTunes Store will be Mac only at launch." That is only about 3% of computer users. It is a tiny market, a low-risk experiment. If it works, we expand. If it does not, you have lost nothing. The labels agree, and the results are staggering. In the first 18 hours, 275,000 tracks are sold. In the first 5 days, over 1 million. Jobs calls Paul Vittich at Warner Music a week after launch to share the million-song milestone. The experiment works spectacularly. And when iTunes for Windows launches in October 2003, the floodgates open. Jobs calls it giving a glass of ice water to somebody in hell. And look, think about what that quote reveals. Jobs knows that Windows users are suffering with terrible software experiences, and he is offering them something beautiful, something elegant, something that actually works well, and he knows they will love it, because the product is genuinely better. Not marketing better, not branding better, actually better. The software is smoother. The interface is cleaner, the experience is more pleasant. And when Windows users experience Apple quality for the first time through iTunes, they start wondering what else Apple makes. iPod US market share jumps from 31% to 65% between January 2004 and January 2005. And then in January 2004, Apple launches the iPod mini. Smaller, aluminum body, multiple colors. It becomes the best-selling iPod model and drives explosive growth. And then in September 2005, the iPod Nano replaces the mini with an even thinner, flash-based design. It sells 1 million units in 17 days. The iPod line is not just a product anymore. It is a phenomenon. And then something unexpected happens. The iPod halo effect. Windows users buy iPods, they fall in love with the design and the user experience, and then they start buying Macs. Apple reports that nearly half of the people buying Macs at Apple stores are former Windows users. Mac sales grow from about 3 million units in 2003 to over 7 million by 2007. A consumer survey found that 19% of PC iPod owners purchased a Mac in the past year, nearly double what Wall Street had expected. The iPod is not just a music player. It is a gateway drug to the entire Apple ecosystem. And no competitor can replicate this because no competitor has the integrated hardware plus software plus content store ecosystem. And honestly, this is the most important strategic insight from the entire decade. Apple does not just sell products. It sells an ecosystem. The iPod works best with iTunes. iTunes works best on a Mac. The Mac works best when you buy it at an Apple store. Everything connects. Everything reinforces everything else. And once you are inside the ecosystem, switching to a competitor means losing your music library, losing your playlists, relearning new software. The switching costs are enormous, not because Apple locks you in maliciously, but because the integration is so seamless that leaving feels painful. Sony tries to compete with the Walkman digital players, but they insist on using their proprietary ACRAF format with restrictive DRM because Sony's music division wants to protect against piracy. This is a catastrophic strategic blunder born from internal conflict. Sony's hardware division wants to compete with iPod. Sony's music division, Sony B&G, wants to prevent piracy. And the two divisions cannot agree. So Sony ships a product that does not play MP3s, the most common music format in the world, and Sony's player does not support it, because one part of the company is sabotaging another part. By 2004, iPod sales overtake Sony Walkman globally, ending Sony's 25-year dominance of portable music. And the lesson is clear. Integrated companies beat siloed companies every time. Step 4 of the Subtraction Formula: own the customer relationship. This is the step most tech companies skip, and it is the step that I think separates Apple from everyone else. Apple retail stores. In 2000, Jobs recruits Ron Johnson from Target to lead retail operations. And the concept starts with a question. Jobs asks, how big is the Nike store? He wants Apple to have a major retail presence like Nike. The conventional wisdom is that this is insane. Apple has maybe 4 products. How do you fill a store with 4 products? And analysts predict disaster. David Goldstein, a channel marketing analyst, famously says Apple will be turning out the lights on a very painful and expensive mistake within 2 years. And here is a detail I love. When Johnson proposes the Genius Bar concept, a place in the store where customers can get technical help from knowledgeable staff, Jobs initially rejects it. His exact words, "That's so idiotic, it'll never work. I've never met someone who knows technology who knows how to connect with people. They're all geeks." Johnson convinces him by arguing that young people in their 20s grew up with technology and can bridge the gap. Jobs changes his mind and has Genius Bar trademarked. Apple even builds a full prototype store inside a warehouse to test and iterate the concept before opening a real one. They spend months tweaking the layout, the lighting, the product placement, the customer flow. This is the attention to detail that separates Apple from everyone else. They prototype a store the way most companies prototype a product. The first 2 Apple stores open on May 19, 2001, in Tysons Corner, Virginia and Glendale, California. And they are an immediate success. But here is the thing. The timing is terrible. May 2001 is the middle of the dot-com bust. Tech companies are going bankrupt left and right. The Nasdaq has lost trillions in value. And Apple is opening retail stores. Analysts think Jobs has finally lost his mind. Gateway country stores are already failing. CompUSA is struggling. The retail graveyard for tech companies is getting crowded. And Apple walks in and says, "We can do this better." Apple stores generate $5,500 per square foot annually, among the highest in all of retail. By 2003, each store averages $3 million in profit per quarter with roughly 60,000 visitors per location. And in 2004, Apple Retail hits $1.2 billion in revenue, breaking the record for the fastest billion-dollar milestone in retail history. David Goldstein, the analyst who predicted failure, was spectacularly wrong. The stores become Apple's most powerful brand asset. They are where people fall in love with the products. They are where the halo effect happens in person. Now, before we get to the final step, I want to mention something for founders who are building their brands right now. AI-powered tool that generates viral UGC and product ad videos. You can upload a reference video for inspiration, and it creates content designed to get 3x better conversions than traditional creative. Whether you are running Facebook ads, TikTok, YouTube, whatever platform, AIAdsy.com is worth checking out. I know several founders who have completely overhauled their ad strategy with this tool. Okay, back to Apple's last act. Step 5 of the Subtraction Formula. Reinvent a category when nobody asks you to. And this is where the decade culminates, because on January 9th, 2007, Steve Jobs walks onto the stage at Macworld in San Francisco and delivers what might be the greatest product announcement in the history of technology. He says he is going to introduce 3 revolutionary products: a widescreen iPod with touch controls. The audience cheers. A revolutionary mobile phone. More cheers. And a breakthrough internet communications device. He repeats this 3 times, the audience is going wild, and then he drops the bomb. These are not 3 separate devices. This is one device, and we are calling it iPhone. And on that same day, Apple officially changes its name from Apple Computer Inc. to Apple Inc. They literally drop computer from their name, because they are no longer just a computer company. They are a consumer electronics company. They are a music company. They are a phone company. They are an everything company. The iPhone launches on June 29, 2007. 4GB model for $499. And thousands of people line up outside Apple stores. Lines that stretch around the block. People camping overnight. It becomes a cultural phenomenon that has nothing to do with needing a new phone, and everything to do with wanting to be part of a moment. Apple sells an estimated 700,000 iPhones in the first weekend. They sell their millionth iPhone on September 10th, just 74 days after launch. The first generation does $1.2 billion in lifetime sales. And I want to point something out about the iPhone that I think gets lost in the excitement of the launch. The original iPhone was objectively kind of limited. No App Store, no copy and paste, no MMS, no 3G, only 2-megapixel camera. Only available on AT&T. By today's standards, it was primitive. But it did not matter, because the core experience, the multi-touch interface, the Safari web browser, the visual voicemail, the integration of phone, iPod, and internet communicator, it was so fundamentally better than everything else that the limitations were irrelevant. Jobs understood something that most product people get wrong. You do not need to be perfect at everything. You need to be perfect at the thing that matters most. And for the iPhone, the thing that mattered most was the touch interface. Everything else could come later. And the competitors? Oh man, the competitors, they do not even understand what just happened. And the quotes from this period are, honestly, some of the most entertaining things in business history. Nokia, the dominant phone company in the world, dismisses the iPhone. They say it is too expensive. No physical keyboard. It will never work in the enterprise market. RIM, the maker of BlackBerry, laughs it off. Microsoft's Steve Ballmer literally goes on camera and says, $500, fully subsidized, with a plan? I said that's the most expensive phone in the world. And it doesn't appeal to business customers because it doesn't have a keyboard. He is laughing, actually laughing, head thrown back. Belly laughing. I have watched this clip probably 20 times and it never gets old. Because the level of confidence combined with the level of wrongness is just extraordinary. And it is not that Ballmer is stupid. He is not. He is a very successful business person. But he is evaluating the iPhone using old world metrics. Price per unit. Enterprise features. Keyboard. He is judging a revolution by the standards of the thing being revolutionized. It is like judging a car by how well it eats hay. The metrics are just wrong. And this is a lesson I think every founder needs to internalize. When a paradigm shift happens, the old metrics become meaningless. Market share in smartphones, measured by units shipped, becomes less important than market share measured by profits. And Apple, to this day, captures something like 85% of all smartphone industry profits, despite having maybe 20% of unit market share. Within 5 years of the iPhone launch, Nokia's market share will collapse from about 50% to single digits. BlackBerry will go from dominant to irrelevant. Microsoft's Windows Mobile will be killed and replaced by Windows Phone, which will also fail. And Apple will become the most profitable phone company on Earth. Samsung had declared they would overtake Apple in portable music by 2007. SanDisk ran an actual anti-iPod marketing campaign called I Don't. Neither of them made a dent. And once the iPhone launched, the game changed so completely that the question was no longer who makes the best phone, but who can build the best ecosystem. And Apple had been building that ecosystem for a decade. So let me tie this all together with the subtraction formula. Because the lesson of this decade is not that Apple was lucky or that Steve Jobs was a genius, although both are arguably true. The lesson is that the most powerful business strategy in the world is radical focus combined with relentless execution. Step 1. Kill everything that does not fit in the grid. And I want to give you some other examples of this principle because it is not just an Apple thing. In 2012, Mark Zuckerberg looked at Facebook's strategy and said the company needed to go mobile first. They killed their HTML5 mobile app and rebuilt it natively. They killed dozens of internal projects that were not mobile-focused. The result was Facebook's mobile ad revenue going from basically zero to over 80% of total revenue within 3 years. Netflix in 2011 tried to split into 2 companies, one for streaming and one for DVD by mail. The market punished them, but the underlying instinct was right. They needed to kill the DVD business to focus on streaming. And streaming is now a $30 billion a year business. The principle of radical subtraction shows up again and again in the most successful tech companies. Go from 350 products to 10. Say no to everything that is not essential. Innovation is saying no to 1,000 things. This is the hardest step because it means killing things that people worked hard on, laying off people, and making enemies. But it is the step that creates the space for everything that follows. And actually, I need to mention one more thing that happened during this decade that does not get enough attention. macOS 10. Apple shipped macOS 10 10.0, codenamed Cheetah, on March 24, 2001. This was the direct descendant of Next Step, the operating system from Jobs' failed company, and it was a complete rewrite of the Mac's foundation, a modern, Unix-based, stable operating system that replaced the aging, crash-prone macOS 9. This is the hidden infrastructure that made everything else possible. The iPod software runs on it. iTunes runs on it. Mac OS X eventually becomes iOS, which powers the iPhone. Every Apple device today, every single one, runs software descended from Next Step. The failed company that Jobs built during his exile turned out to be the technological foundation for a $4 trillion empire. You really cannot make this stuff up. Step 2. Make one product undeniable. The iMac proved Apple could still make products people love. It was the proof of concept for the entire turnaround. If the iMac had failed, nothing else would have mattered. You need one hit to buy yourself the right to keep going. Step 3. Build the ecosystem. Not just the product. iPod plus iTunes Music Store. Hardware plus software plus content. An integrated experience that no competitor could replicate because no competitor controlled all 3 pieces. This is the most defensible competitive advantage in technology. It is not about having the best hardware or the best software. It is about having the best system. Step 4. Own the customer relationship. And honestly, this is the step I think most tech companies still have not learned. Apple retail stores gave Apple direct access to consumers. No middleman. No Best Buy sales associate pushing Dell laptops because Dell pays higher commissions. Apple controlled the entire experience from the moment a customer walked through the door. This is something most tech companies still do not understand. The relationship with the customer is the most valuable asset you have. Step 5. Reinvent a category when nobody asks you to. The iPhone was not responding to customer demand. Nobody was asking for a touchscreen phone with no keyboard. Jobs did not do focus groups. He did not ask consumers what they wanted. He built what he believed the future should look like. And then he convinced the world he was right. As he put it, it's really hard to design products by focus groups. A lot of times, people don't know what they want until you show it to them. And I want to take you through the financial trajectory year by year because the growth curve is incredible. In 1997, revenue is $7.1 billion, and Apple loses over $1 billion. In 1998, the iMac year, revenue drops slightly to $5.9 billion, but they earn $309 million in profit. First profitable year in 3 years. Then steady improvement, $6.1 billion in 1999, $8 billion in 2000, a dip to $5.4 billion in 2001 because of the dot-com bust, and 9/11s, then slow recovery. And then 2005 happens. Fiscal 2005 is the breakout year. Revenue jumps 68% from $8.3 billion to $13.9 billion, driven by iPod sales exploding from 4.4 million to over 22 million units. Net income jumps from $266 million to $1.33 billion. This is the year Apple definitively transitions from turnaround story to growth juggernaut. Then $19.3 billion in 2006 and $24.6 billion in 2007. By April 2007, Apple has sold its 100 millionth iPod, about 5.5 years after launch. And the numbers tell the story. Revenue goes from $7.1 billion in 1997 to $24.6 billion in 2007. Net income goes from a loss of over $1 billion to a profit of $3.5 billion. Market cap goes from $2.8 billion to $150 billion. Employee morale goes from suicidal to euphoric. Brand perception goes from shut it down to the most innovative company in the world. And I want to zoom out here and talk about something that I think gets overlooked when people study Apple's decade, the role of timing. Because Jobs did not just make great products, he made great products at exactly the right moment. The iMac arrives in 1998, just as the internet is becoming mainstream, and people need an easy way to get online. The iPod arrives in 2001, just as the music industry is being disrupted by Napster, and people are ready for a legal, easy alternative. iTunes Music Store arrives in 2003, just as the labels are desperate enough to try something new. The iPhone arrives in 2007, just as mobile internet technology is mature enough to support a real smartphone experience. Every product hits a cultural moment, and I do not think that is entirely coincidence. I think Jobs had an uncanny ability to sense where culture was headed and to arrive there with a product just as the wave was building. He was not following trends. He was not creating trends out of nothing. He was surfing emerging trends with products that were perfectly designed to ride them. Oh, and remember Michael Dell, the guy who said he would shut Apple down and give the money back? By 2006, Apple's market cap surpasses Dell's. And Jobs reportedly shows Dell's quote at an internal meeting. He puts it up on a slide and adds underneath it, "Michael, thought you'd like to know." I mean, come on, that is the kind of moment that makes you want to stand up and cheer. And as of right now, Apple is worth over $4 trillion. Dell is worth about $70 billion. Apple is worth roughly 57 Dells. 57. So much for shutting it down and giving the money back. Here is what I will leave you with. Because this story, more than any other business story I have studied, makes me believe in the power of doing less. Not less work, not less effort, less stuff, fewer products, fewer features, fewer distractions, fewer meetings, fewer initiatives. Apple did not outwork its competitors during this decade. It outfocused them. While Dell was making 30 different computer models, Apple was making 4. While Sony was fighting itself internally, Apple was building an integrated ecosystem. While Nokia was adding more buttons and more features to its phones, Apple was designing a phone with exactly one button. And you know what I find fascinating? The principle of subtraction did not just apply to Apple's product line. It applied to the products themselves. The iMac subtracted the floppy drive when everyone thought that was essential. The iPod subtracted buttons by replacing them with a scroll wheel. The iPhone subtracted the keyboard entirely, replacing it with a touchscreen. Every Apple product from this era is defined as much by what it removes as by what it adds. That is the subtraction philosophy at every level. Company strategy, product design, user interface, marketing message, everything is about doing less, but doing it better than anyone else. The subtraction formula is not just a business strategy. It is a philosophy, and it starts with the hardest question any founder can ask. What should I stop doing? Steve Jobs answered that question with a 2x2 grid and a marker on a whiteboard, and the answer saved Apple and changed the world. And here is the thing that gets me every time I finish researching this decade. Everything that Apple is today, everything, traces back to this 10-year period. The Mac ecosystem traces back to the Next acquisition and macOS X in 2001. The iPhone traces back to the iPod and the touch interface expertise Apple developed. The App Store traces back to the iTunes Music Store model. Apple Retail traces back to Ron Johnson and the Genius Bar. The design language traces back to Jony Ive and the Bondi Blue iMac. The brand identity traces back to Think Different. Every thread of the company that is now worth over $4 trillion was woven during this decade, from 1997 to 2007. From death to dominance, Jobs said it best in his Stanford commencement speech. There's an old Wayne Gretzky quote that I love. I skate to where the puck is going to be, not where it has been. We've always tried to do that at Apple since the very beginning. And during this decade, he did exactly that. He saw where computing was going, he saw where music was going, he saw where phones were going, and he built products that were already there waiting when the world arrived. From 90 Days of Cash to the most valuable consumer electronics company on earth. From shut it down to the iPhone. From $2.8 billion to $150 billion in 10 years. That is the Subtraction Formula. 5 steps. Kill everything that does not fit, make one product undeniable, build the ecosystem, own the customer relationship, reinvent a category. And it all started with saying no.